Hello, and welcome to Trouble on the Road, featuring Walter Mosley and S.A. Cosby, a program in the all-virtual 2021 Virginia Festival of the Book. I'm Jane Kulo, director of the Virginia Center for the Book, a program of Virginia Humanities. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't read today's books, we hope you will. For details about how to buy them from our bookseller for this event, Book No Further, please visit vabook.org, where you can also explore our full schedule and watch past events. While you're there, please consider making a donation to support the festival's ongoing work at vabook.org/give. Now, I am thrilled to introduce our speakers. Walter Mosley, author of Blood Grove, is one of America's most celebrated and beloved writers. A Grand Master of the Mystery Writers of America, Walter has written more than 60 critically acclaimed books, television scripts, and plays, and has received numerous awards, including the Anisfield Wolf Book Award and Lifetime Achievement Awards from PEN America, the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, and the National Book Foundation. Sean A. Cosby, author of Blacktop Wasteland, is a writer from Southeastern Virginia, now residing in Gloucester, Virginia. His short fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies and magazines, and his short story, The Grass Beneath My Feet, won the Anthony Award for Best Short Story in 2019. And our moderator today is Stephen Mac Jones, the Hammett Prize and Nero Wolfe Award-winning author of the Detroit-based August Snow thriller series, which is in development for a TV series. His third entry in the series, Dead of Winter, publishes in May. Thank you all for joining us today. I am so excited and can't wait to hear this. Steve, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jane. Sorry about that little glitch. I have to say that I'm just over the moon talking with Mr. Walter Mosley and Mr. Sean S.A. Cosby, two extraordinary writers who have been and are now changing the landscape of not only the genre of crime fiction, but fiction in general, at least in my humble opinion. Well, first of all, we've already talked among ourselves as far as where we're calling in from. Walter, would you hurt us again by telling us where you're calling in from?
I'm not going to go through the whole thing.
No.
I'm just in California, and close to the
ocean. And I take it the ocean isn't frozen.
No, not right now. I'm sure it was at some time in the past millennia, but not today.
No. Sean, where are you calling in from?
I am calling from the wilds of Virginia. I'm about 2 hours south of Washington, D.C., so just far enough away that I can enjoy the quiet of crickets and June bugs, and also in the summertime, fight the good fight against mosquitoes.
Well, that's wonderful. And here I am in the suburbs of Detroit, where it is currently 20 degrees. And that is a heat wave for this week. You both have extraordinary new books out. Mr. Mosley, you have Blood Grove, which is just extraordinary. It's the 15th, I believe, in the Easy Rawlins series. Easy has grown over the years. Would you agree?
Well, he's grown older. I agree with that, and I think that's how Easy would look at it too. He's grown older, and in some ways that's good. Though I think he would rather be a little more reckless and young if he had a choice. He has a son that's grown now, an adopted son, Jesus, who's off in the world, married to the killer mouse's ex-girlfriend, and he has a daughter, and she's growing up. She's kind of wonderful. So I think he's happy. He's older. He's in LA, 1969. It's just after the Summer of Love. I think I don't. The Summer of Love was 69. I think it was 68. But he's there, and and as usual, very thoughtful and in trouble.
Well, that's a sea change year to bring the story to, bring Easy to. Sean, you have two books actually. The new one is Razorblade Tears. When does that come out?
That comes out in July. It's a standalone crime novel. It's not a sequel to Blacktop Wasteland, but it's in the same S.A. Cosby literary universe. So I'm taking a cue from the MCU, and I'm trying to create my own little pocket universe where characters from different works kind of walk in and out of each other's lives.
Well, just please remember that Bug is kind of Iron Man, so we need to come back. Okay.
Bug makes a cameo. Bug makes a cameo, and he makes an uncredited cameo in Razorblade Tears. I think there's a scene where a car is damaged, and the guy driving the wrecker truck, it's obviously Bug for anybody that has read Blacktop Wasteland. Because as he passed by, one of the characters of Razorblade Tears talks about how he has those dead gunslinger eyes. And so that's a little nod to Bug. Bug will be back. I'm actually have plans to revisit the characters of Blacktop Wasteland in the future. Not right now, but soon I want to go back and talk about them again. Well, he's an interesting guy. He won't leave me alone.
Well, good. We're readers so glad to hear that. I personally so-called bugs the hell out of you. There's in both books, there is a familial connection. There is a strong sense of family and duty, not only to family, but can you gentlemen talk about those familial connections that these two gentlemen have?
When I talk about writing and talk about literature, I always say to people that the most important thing is the pedestrian stance of the fiction. And people get upset with me. They go, "What do you mean pedestrian? This is beyond." And I'm going, "Well, yeah, but if people are going to believe that these people really exist in the world and they're really doing things in the world, they have to be doing normal everyday things. They have to be eating, they got to go to the bathroom, they have to have a mother and a father, or had a mother and a father and a dog and a child, and the things that people do that attaches them, that anchors them to the real world." And so Easy, it's interesting because Easy has a real daughter somewhere. He doesn't know where she is. And but he's adopted one son. Jesus is off in the world. Feather, who's his young teenage daughter, who's living with him on this mountaintop, actually in the middle of Los Angeles. And you can't really get the beat of somebody's life unless there's a home that they're going to, somebody that they love, somebody that they want to take care of. So his connections, his good friends who are like an extended family, certainly, his daughter, and then the people that his adopted daughter is related to, who come into play in this book. That allows you to understand easy, and allows him to be able to talk about the world in a way which is, normalized. And then you can get to the wilder stuff that goes on in his life.
Right.
What's so funny about that? I was gonna say what's so funny about Walter saying that is the exact piece of advice he gave a crowd at a lecture in Virginia about 7 or 8 years ago when I was in the crowd. And it was about how to write a novel in a year. And that's the piece that always stuck with me, because my first published book was a detective story. And he said something to the effect of, you got to make your character interesting, he or she has to be doing other things than detecting. They have to have stuff they're doing when they're not detecting, because they're not always searching out the mystery. And so with my first book, My Darkest Prayer, I made the character an attendant at a funeral home. So when he's not detecting, he has this job. In Blacktop Wasteland, even though Bug is this incredible heist driver, he also owns an auto repair shop. He's a father. He's got a daughter from a previous relationship. He's got 2 sons with his wife. He loves his wife. His best friend and his cousin Kelvin works at the auto repair shop with him. He has a hobby. He maintains and refurbishes this car that belonged to his dad. So you create these foundational segments. You create these foundational pillars in the character's life. And then as a writer, what I like to do is I just come along and just take a hammer to those pillars, and that creates the narrative.
Well, do these familial connections come from your life, your relationships? I noticed in the foreword to Blacktop Wasteland that it's dedicated to your father.
And me and my dad, me and my dad grew up. Yeah, when I grew up, me and my dad didn't have the greatest relationship because him and my mom separated at an early age. And I've said this before in other venues. We were really, really poor. My mom, unfortunately, became partially disabled shortly after I was born. If you listen to my early years, it's like a bad country song. My mom got sick, her house burned down, and my parents split up. And for a long time, I had a difficult relationship with my father. Really, a relationship that was contentious to a certain degree. I'm very blessed that we've been able to repair it. He's still alive. My mom's still alive. I just now think I could probably take my dad in an arm wrestling contest because he's a larger than life character. But writing Blacktop Wasteland, just now, he just turned 75, and I'm 50-50 on it because the dude got he got fingers like hot dogs. But it was a cathartic experience for me to write the book because I was able, and not every book is like that, but this particular one for me was very cathartic. And anybody that reads my writing, there is a through line of father-son relationships. I write a lot about broken men and how those broken men affect the people around them. But that's not a requirement to write that kind of fiction at all. I don't believe it. It's what I got and it's what I use. So, but that's definitely not a requirement at all.
It gives you a focal point to a jumping off point, correct? Would you agree with that?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Now, it's my understanding that you know a little bit about funeral homes, Sean.
Yeah. My significant other owns a funeral home. I work. That's my day job. So I'm very lucky I can get off whenever I need to. My boss is pretty flexible. But it's the setting of my first novel. And I actually have plans to write a follow-up to that novel. There's a whole series of characters in that first book that I would love to revisit. And those books give me an outlet where there's a lot of there's a lot of heavy stuff in Blacktop Wasteland. There's a lot of heavy stuff in Razorblade Tears. And so my detective character, Nathan Waymaker, from Darkest Prayer, he's still serious, but it's a little more cotton candy popcorn as opposed to the sturm and drang of my other work, which is nothing wrong with it. Just sometimes it's fun to kind of dip your toe into a different pool, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That was full disclosure, that was always inspired by Easy Rawlins and Mouse. I actually named Nathan's sidekick Skunk because I wanted to keep the animal motif going. So,
Well, Mr. Mosley, I was going to ask you about, and maybe this is a weird question, but Easy is growing roses on his rooftop. Is that, am I out of my head to think that that's kind of a metaphor for a hard man offering a prayer to the heavens? I mean, it almost...
Well, it's an interesting question. The previous question that you asked, I'm going to answer this, but I have to go back to the previous question. The idea of, is your life in these words. And last night, I'm working on a television show that I'm doing with Sam Jackson for Apple TV. And I'm in the middle of a rewrite, and it's really, it's not stressful, but I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do in the rewrite. And so I'm working at it. There's a time limit. And last night I was dreaming the whole night about if there was a serial killer among the Maasai, and that whenever they killed one of the Maasai, one Maasai killed another, they would take, because they have all this scarification and tattoo kind of stuff going on, that they would cut that off, leatherize it, and that would be, what they would have for each murder, that kind of thing. And I was absolutely sure in my dreams that it had to do with this television show that I'm writing. And when I woke up, I realized that it did not have anything to do, with the television show that I was writing. And I can't even forget it. It stuck with me so strongly. I really loved it, but that's not a thing. Now, all of that said, okay, so I'm writing a thing. I might even think it's about my family, but my family doesn't think it's about my family, and it's like that. But my father, he loved growing plants. He created his own breeds of dahlias. He would pollinate the plants and did all this stuff. And, it was great, and he had these roses in our front yard over on Spalding and near Fairfax and Pico that were gorgeous, giant rose. And, it was back in the day that nobody was going to steal your rose. It was great. But I think, even though I don't remember thinking about this before you asked the question, I think that's why I had him growing the roses on the roof, because, he's a country man. He's living in LA, like so many country men and women live in LA, and he's growing roses on the roof. So it's that, now, so your question becomes, is he, giving up some prayer, to say, well, I did this, so can you forgive me for this hard life I'm living? And I actually don't know if that's what my father was doing. It might very well have been what he was doing. And if that's true, then it's also what he's doing,
Yes. Well, my original question for you was COBOL, Fortran, or C++?
COBOL, assembler, and RPG. Those are the languages I used as a programmer.
Okay.
COBOL, and I coded in binary. I just want you to know, I coded in binary. Like, I could follow, the opcode, the branch and link register, I was that deep into computers. I mean, I talk about this stuff to people who do computers today. It's still what computers are based on, but nobody knows it. They
Yes,
said,
yes.
what assembler? What do you mean binary? Binary? I don't do binary. I say, yeah, you do, man. Said, it's in the computer.
One of the reasons why I brought that up is because I was in marketing communications for a software company long before August Snow. And as a person in marketing, I have to tell you, I had no idea what any programmer ever said to me. None.
That's true. They did it on purpose.
Well,
They did it on purpose. They wanted to mystify their work so you wouldn't be able to make them work harder.
well, here's the thing. I interviewed a programmer about a new program that was coming out from the company. And I was so lost after 10 minutes. I said, so what you're telling me is the software does this. And he looked at me and he said, well, no, but I guess we could make it do that. So it was a very difficult job. We've talked about you know, our characters, familial impact, and it's really difficult to talk about writers, especially writers of color these days, without bringing up the subject that do you believe that every piece of writing produced by a person of color is actually a political statement? I mean, regardless of genre or young adult mystery, it's a question.
All writing is a political statement, I think.
I'm sorry?
I was gonna say, I think all writing is a political statement. I think all writing is a political statement.
Okay.
Whether it's by a person of color or anybody. I think, you know, if you go back to Chekhov, you go back, you know, maybe even Shakespeare tangentially is about the politics of the time. He's writing to the queen. He's writing for their approval. And so rhetorically, all writing is political. However, I do think there is a certain amount of specification when it comes to writers of color. You know, I didn't sit down to write Blacktop Wasteland to be a 300-page sermon on class and race, but I did sit down to talk about things about class and race because those things are important to me. I don't think the writer of color has any extra responsibility to write about it because, like I said again, I think, you know, there's almost a homogeneity to writing where all writing has some type of political discourse, even in the DNA of the writing, even in a very comedic work. Like if you look at a book like Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy O'Toole, it's a comedic book, but there's a lot of political theory, a lot of social critique in that book. And then, you know, you also laugh out loud. And I think that's the secret to good writing, is to get your point across, but also be entertaining, you know, or to quote, you know, Mary Poppins, a little bit of honey makes the medicine go down. So I think there's all writing has a political bent, but I don't think, I think sometimes people in positions of publishing authority seem to think that, you know, like my friend Kelly Garrett talks about this all the time about how, you know, you should be able to, as a person of color, to write a funny, cozy mystery that doesn't have to mine the 500-year, you know, history of trauma that people of color have endured. That's not saying you ignore that trauma, but you shouldn't have to do it. You know, you should be able to write whatever you want to write, again, because it's inherently going to have some political commentary or philosophy in it. That's just that's S.A. Cosby speaking for himself. That's just my opinion.
That's interesting. I agree with Sean that all writing is political, but not necessarily consciously political. I mean, I'm sure when George Lucas wrote Star Wars, he didn't realize that he had no black people in Star Wars. I mean, he had one black voice, James Earl Jones, but he had no black people. He didn't even have people with brown hair. I mean, he didn't even have people with brown eyes. I mean, it was amazing what the future looked like, to George Lucas. I don't think he thought about that, and I wouldn't come up and say, "Well, you're a racist," any more than anybody else in America is a racist. And I would go further. When you talk about people of color, I'm one of those people who doesn't believe in the existence of white people. There's no white country, white language, white history, white religion. The idea, in order to be a country, you have to have something in common. And so-called white people don't have that. So that makes all people of color, just a whole bunch of different colors,
Yes.
When I write about, Easy Rawlins in 1969 or 1959 or 1949 or 1939, every time I write about Easy, he's out in the world, he's on the street, he's in trouble. And a lot of times he's in trouble for being black. I can't avoid that. If I jumped over that and said, well, I was driving down the street with this French white girl and she was, sitting right next to me with her hand all down my lap, you have to say, well, did the police drive by? Because, the police gonna stop you for that shit, And so I had to, I find there are moments that I have to talk about what Easy's life is.
Yes.
Most of us, I think, from then, at any rate, don't think about that as racism. They just say, hey, man, you got to be careful out there, because when the cops stop you, Walter Mosley, when they stop you, you are going to be in trouble, because that's what happens when the cops stop you. And yeah, go on.
I'm sorry. So essentially, it's not a matter of politicizing race. It's a matter of experiential, your life experience.
Yeah, well, what it's like when you're on the street, somebody else on the street, they have a different experience, and it's true. But in the future, in Star Wars, there should be some black people and Asian people and brown colored people and brown haired people up in there. It's like they said, well, damn, it's like, so really, you don't think we're there at all, which is a kind of a genocide,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Sean?
That's why I used to love Star Trek, because at least we got Uhura.
Yeah,
so we made it in Star Trek. We're still around, thank God. But I think to Walter's point, yeah, go ahead.
To tune into Star Trek to see Uhura and Sulu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course Spock, but it was wonderful to see a version of myself in the future, sharing the future with other people. So
oh no, I definitely agree.
I want to get back to your writing. Sean, I know that we are often asked this question, and indulge me if you will. But how would you characterize your process, your creative process?
I wish I was a really organized writer. I have friends who have like whiteboards that have that have Venn diagrams on them, and I have friends that have copious notes and all that. I'm just not that guy. I was, I'll be honest, I'll be the first one to admit I'm lazy, and I like to do as little work as possible. For me, my process always starts with the what if. Like, what if a person did this? What if this happened? What if a guy who used to be a getaway driver got pulled into one last job? And then I kind of extrapolate from there. What I do personally is I like to write myself a semi-detailed synopsis, but it's a very stream of consciousness type of synopsis. I don't punctuate it. I just write out I write out the story. Like, this is what happened. This is first act, second act, third act, and the ending. Now, oftentimes that synopsis bears no resemblance to the final product. But for me, I was akin writing to like trying to get in your house. And I have to be able to get into the house of the story before I can start working on it. So I have to see a possible pathway for the story, and then I can start writing. And I use the synopsis as a sort of a map or sort of a guide. Like in the synopsis of Black Dot Wasteland, Bug dies in a very horrible. It's very Shakespearean death. And of course, anybody that's read the book, spoiler alert, he doesn't die, but there are significant things that happen to him, and there's significant changes to him as a person. Now, did I know those changes were going to happen? I had an idea, but I wasn't 100% sure until I got into the book. For me, a lot of times, like writing a book is like improvising on a piece of music. A long time ago, I used to play the guitar badly. But the one thing that I loved about it was the ability to improvise, the ability to, take a note or take a melody and just kind of see where it goes. You're still working within the framework of a song, but you can, like I said, extrapolate off of that and see what happens. But yeah, I have, like I said, I have friends who are very, great writers who, like I said, have all this incredible meticulous planning, and I'm not, that ain't me. Like I said, I'm lazy. I don't like doing it. I do research when I absolutely have to, but I always there's a Jack London quote that always sticks in my head. Somebody told Jack London one time, you're not a very original writer. He said, yeah, but I'm one hell of an elaborator. So it's like, if I can, that's a part of writing. The best writing is when you finish the book and you look back at it, as for me as a reader, you're like, wow, some of that stuff that happened in there was kind of unbelievable, but he or she, the author, made me buy in. And so that's what I try to do.
Mr. Mosley?
The question is, how do I approach writing?
Yes. What do you have any set process, or as the question often comes up with writers, are you a planner or pantser? Fly by the seat of your pants or plot everything out?
Well, the thing I do is that I write every day. And I write every day for about 3 hours, no longer, sometimes shorter, but no longer. And that, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, if I can make it. It's usually about 360, I think. So that's the organization. Of course, it doesn't matter what I'm writing on. I just write every day, because I'm working, to get there. Yeah. Sometimes, like especially when I have a deadline, someone said, we need this book and we need it by, June. I'll write an outline, but my outlines are very simple. I go, 1, Easy's just come back from a hard case. 2, his partners aren't there, and the assistant is there, and he doesn't want her there, so he gives her the day off. 3, the Vietnam veteran shows up. 4, and I get to about 100, and I say, okay, 100, that's good enough. I'll stop, and then I'll write my novel, based on that outline. But sometimes, like I was talking to somebody one day about pornography, actually, and we were talking about pornography, and I said to him, I said, well, Debbie doesn't do it anymore. And I thought, wow, that's a good title. I should write a book based on Debbie. And I did. I started writing, I thought it was going to be a comedy, but it wasn't. But it, and so there was no outline, there was no preparation, but the fact that the foundation is I write every day. Yes. So I write every day, and it's like, okay, now I'm writing Debbie Doesn't Do It Anymore. Hopefully it gets somewhere, or now I'm writing the Easy Rawlins novel that I outlined, or the Fearless Jones, or the Landon McGill, or the Socrates Fortlaw, or whatever, like that.
Okay. All right. That's the discipline. That's the job before you. Mm-hmm. gentlemen, you both have, there are strong females in both Blacktop Wasteland and Blood Grove. Can you speak to what your influences are as far as bringing strong female characters to life and not cutouts?
For me, it's very important. Well, I take all my female characters like I take all my characters. I want all my characters to be three-dimensional. I want them to be fully formed people, you know, characters, not caricatures. That's what I always say. Like with Blacktop Wasteland, Bug's wife Kia and his mom, and even an ancillary character like Jenny, I always look at it from what drives them, what motivates them, what do they want, and what do they need, and what are they willing to do to get those things. And sometimes with like Kia, it's just I want to protect my family. I'd like to have a house that's on a foundation, not on wheels. With Bug's mom, what does she want? She wants respect. She wants her man back, but he's gone and he's disappeared. Bug's father, and when nobody knows where he is. And so what does she want? That respect. How does she go about getting it? And why does she take that path? And that's the same approach I take to Bug. I'd be lying if I said that it wasn't important to me to make sure that my female characters are, not buffoonish. I think we've all seen that those online memes about male writers who write very transient and very just idiotic characterizations of women. Definitely didn't want to do that. And so I think, I approach it like I do all my characters. Now, for specific inspiration, the character of Kia was inspired by a lot of the women in my life. My mom is a very strong inspiration for a character like Kia. Now, conversely, a character like Jenny in the book is somebody I just kind of pulled out of the air. But she's based on people I know, as most writers do, people I've encountered, people who find themselves in desperate situations, and people who are in desperate situations sometimes take desperate measures. And so, but the main thing is, just to reiterate again, draw strong characters, not caricatures. And I think if you do that, whether you're writing about a male or a female, whether you're writing about a heterosexual person or an LGBTQ person, whether you're writing about a septuagenarian or whether you're writing about a teenager, your character should be okay if you keep that to the forefront.
I can't argue with that.
So empathy is a key to any character that you create. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Even your villains. I think a lot of people hear that old saw that, oh, the villain is a hero in his own story or her story. Well, that's true to an extent. That's true, I think, to a certain extent. We all want to see ourselves as our idolized version. But at the same time, the villain is a person, even if they're repugnant, they're a person, There's somebody who has wants and needs and desires. And a lot of times the villain is just a lot of times the villain is just a person who's willing to do what the hero isn't, is willing to go further. That's not bound by conventional morality. A lot of times people who are villains know that they're bad people. They know they're doing terrible things, but they're able to compartmentalize it. And then sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're able to fool themselves. I think that's what makes that type of writing interesting, in my opinion.
Yes. Well,
I want to say about that. Number one, I agree. I remember this Thor comic book where Thanos was fighting Odin, and Odin was saying, how evil he was and how base he was and how terrible he was, and Thanos was saying back to him as they were fighting, he says, but in my story, I'm the hero. I'm the person saving the universe. And it was so much fun to hear that dialogue, to actually hear it in dialogue. You know what I mean? It was a really a nice thing. Listen, the reason, because the question comes back to women, right? I mean, it says, well, how do these men write these women? And I'm not really, people have strengths in writing and people have weaknesses in writing. And a lot of that has to do with how they're brought up, So, like, for instance, when I was a kid, I was 17, my father and I were down in Galveston, Texas. We were staying with my Aunt Henrietta, who's my father's older half sister. And somebody had just been killed down the street. Some guy had been killed because his girlfriend, because he told his girlfriend he's going back to his wife. And so she killed him. And she shot him, a whole bunch of times. And I was like, oh my God, I'm scared to death. I'm sitting in the bed and my father was laughing and he told Henrietta that I was afraid. And Henrietta walked in the room and she had a purse, she had this big purse. And she said, "Are you afraid, honey?" And I said, "Yes, Aunt Henrietta, I am. I'm scared." And she said, "Baby, you ain't got to be afraid. I got a 45 in this here purse. Ain't nobody getting to you before they get to me. And ain't nobody coming to me." It wasn't, I'm not trying to be liberal with, women, of any kind. These are the women I've known, you know what I mean? And it's like, and I think that, sometimes when you're raised in a really, a kind of a classically sexist environment, girls can't do this, girls can't do that, girls can't, it's like, classically sexist as a racist, it does become very hard to understand. You see television shows and movies where people are writing about Black people, they have no idea what Black people are like. And so they say, well, I'm writing them the way I would write myself. And that's their form of empathy.
Yes.
It doesn't work because, so when there's a character who I don't understand, I don't write about them, or I write about them as little as possible, but but I feel open in certain ways, and I'm not comfortable saying, well, it's simply a matter of empathy. There are things that some people can do and other people can't do, and that's what makes the world interesting.
Yes.
I wanted to jump off on that. I agree with that 100%. A lot of the characters in my books, female and male, are influenced by the world I grew up in. Like I said, we grew up really, really poor, but I grew up around a lot of hard people, men and women, tough people that, my uncles worked on the water. They were watermen. They worked on crab boats and oyster boats. And, 16-hour days of working those oyster tongs. You come home with Popeye forearms. And my grandmother and my aunts worked. My grandma and my aunt worked in the crab factory. So my grandfather and my uncles would catch the crabs, and my aunts worked at a factory that picked the crab. And those ladies knew what they were doing with a knife. And so they were not to be. And I grew up behind a bar. I grew up behind a shot house. Like I literally. Right now, if I walk out my door, the building still stands. It's a closed now. About 28 steps is a shot house. So I grew up, sneaking in there at 13 years old, but had no business in there. And I saw my dad in there one night. This was after my mom and dad. If you live in the country, my mom and dad separated, but my dad only moved 8 miles away, so he was in another state. And so I saw him in there, and I saw him defend a woman who another man was accosting. And I saw my dad slap this man so hard his pants fell down. True story. Swear to God. Sounded like a rifle shot when he hit him. And I remember turning to my brother, and I remember saying to him, I said, well, we're never going to step out of pocket. And my brother said, what do you mean? I said, do you see Daddy just hit that man and his pants fell down? I'm not saying nothing to nobody. I'm going to be on my best behavior the rest of my life. But I remember as a kid that even though my mom and dad didn't get along and there were problems there, and again, as you grow as an adult, you realize those problems really don't have anything to do with you. They're consist of what's going on between these two adults. But I remember going home thinking my dad is the kind of man that won't stand to see a woman accosted. And that stuck with me. That always stuck with me. And my grandfather was like that. My grandfather was another, he was a hard person. They were raised in hard circumstances, but they were sweet to us. They were nice to us. There's a picture. I wish I had it ready. When my grandfather is playing with us as kids, and me and my cousin are dressed up as indigenous folks with our headbands on and stuff. And my grandfather has this little Roy Rogers cowboy hat on. It's about the size of an egg carton. And he was that kind of person. He had that kind of heart in him. But at the same time, he was a dude that was strong enough to bend quarters with his fingers. So, there was these dichotomous situations with these people I grew up with. And I think that definitely influences the way my writing comes out and the way I see characters. And, I had well, last thing I'll say about this, I had some cousins that were, as we say around my way, they go for bad. They was some bad dudes. And even they were folks that, were kind to me, would take me along with them on their adventures that I probably shouldn't talk about because statute of limitations probably hadn't run out. But I had cousins like that. And so, all of that becomes this sort of, mythology that you can draw from. And but to Walter's point, yeah, I didn't grow up in a really overtly sexist environment because my mom and my grandma, they ran the household. They paid the bills. My grandfather would come home and hand my grandmother the check and like, all right, pay the bills, and then take some money to go out to the shot house. And so I grew up in this environment where women were treated as equals. They were strong. My grandmother and my mother were great readers. My aunt got me started on Stephen King because she would give me his old book. So I grew up in that environment. And so when I go to sit down to write a female character, I'm thinking of those women. I'm thinking of those people, and so like I said, I wholeheartedly agree with what Walter said.
Well, I just want to take a minute to let folks that are viewing this that we're talking with the extraordinary Mr. Walter Mosley, whose new book is Blood Grove, and Sean S.A. Cosby, who is just extraordinary. So the book is Blacktop Wasteland and soon to be Razor Blade Tears. These are writers who are just incredible, and please add them to your bookshelf. Spend the evening with these gentlemen. Let me say this, Mr. Mosley, aside from Easy Rawlins, I have read you produced a couple of cowboy short stories, correct?
Well, just one, I think.
Just one?
Showdown on the Hudson. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think there's another one. Though I have written a lot, but I don't think there's another one.
Okay. A Western and also science fiction, which is, your science fiction is amazing. So I just wanted to say that you're extraordinarily diverse in your creativity, and you bring the same passion and insight to any project. So again, thank you.
I think Sean, you've written in the alternate genre, right? Not necessarily science. Have you written science fiction?
Yeah. Well, nobody bought it, but I have written it. But I have a novella that was published a few years ago. I have a novella that was published a few years ago that's a diesel punk reimagining of Othello. It imagines Othello and Iago as sky pilots. I actually just wrote a short horror story for the Horror Writers Association of America's anthology. I started out writing sci-fi and fantasy, but I have a fantasy novel, I think it's out of print now, called The Brotherhood of the Blade, and that's sort of a modern, it's like a mashup of Highlander and Hong Kong martial art flicks. And I started out reading and writing a lot of fantasy and stuff like that. But I do think, I think as writers, there's an old story that Stephen King said one time about when he wrote his first novel and then he followed it up with another horror novel. And his agent, he had a third novel. He had two choices: another third horror novel and a crime novel. And the horror novel was a stronger book. And his agent said, "We should publish that one, but man, I really don't want to." And Stephen King said, "Well, why do you say that?" He says, "Well, if we do that, you're going to be branded as a horror writer." And Stephen King said, I was a 28-year-old kid. He's like, I thought, well, no, that's not true. I'll be able to write whatever I want to write. And, obviously that's didn't bear out as he thought it would. And I think that happens to writers a lot. I think you get, I don't want to say pigeonhole because that seems a negative connotation, but I do think you get known for something, and you dance with who brought you, so to speak. And I love writing crime fiction. I came to it late. I didn't really think I had what it took to be a crime writer. But you talked about cowboys and stuff. I'd love to write a black cowboy story or book. I'd love to reimagine some sci-fi. I think writers, we all, I think, infinitely curious about fantastical worlds, whether they're fantastical jewelry store heists or, invigorating mysteries, or whether you want to write about, the nature of reality. So I think a lot of times you do get sort of, put into a box. But, if you get to be like Mr. Mosley, you get to kind of break down that box and write what you want. So hopefully I'll get to that level one day and I can bring back my my fantasy novel for the masses. So
Right.
Well, gentlemen, this is just an absolute pleasure. I think we've hit our time limit. I'm not sure.
We got close enough. I mean, if you have something else to ask us, you can probably ask.
Well, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So every character, well, let's say Easy and Bug, and I find this with the character that I'm involved with, August Snow.
Mhm.
There's always this struggle to stay on a true north path. That's the way his folks raised him, but with the experiences of being a Marine in Afghanistan, former Marine now, and ex-cop, having seen things that test that true north path, it's sometimes easy to sway from that path. Do you find that with Easy and Bug, that their goal is to follow a true north path, but circumstances and experiences often push them off that heading?
Whose true north are you talking about? You talking about theirs? You talking about yours?
I'm talking about what we accept as truly moral, truly ethical, the right path of living a good, honest, nonviolent life. All of the things that we've been born and raised to think and
I think
believe.
It's so
I think
interesting.
for now specific. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
When
Go
you
ahead,
think about what's right and wrong, Mouse is a killer, and Easy loves Mouse, so he accepts the fact that Mouse is a killer. He's not going to have, a New Testament version of condemnation of his friend because he's done the wrong thing. So my allegiance, to God and country means that I have to turn him in. He would never do that. Never do that. He would never do that. It's not because he's afraid of Mouse that he wouldn't do it, and that's why Mouse likes him. A lot of people won't do it with Mouse because they're scared of him, but Easy doesn't do it because it's his friend. If he felt that Mouse did something wrong, he would stand up against him. I think the question is for the characters that, you know, maybe all of us work with, is that it's easy to know the right path, but it's not so easy to survive it. And I think that that, you know, Easy's always going to be doing the right thing, but the question is will he be alive at the end of that road? And that, so that's the way I perceive that, you know, the answer to that question.
Yes. How do you get to that point? Yes.
With Bug specifically, that's the crux of the story, is that he has this life that is quote unquote the good life. He's on the right path, but circumstances, both of his own making and beyond his control, push him ever closer to straying from that path. And the question is, you know, what is morality with when you're, you know, staring down, you know, an electric bill and your light's about to get cut off? What is morality when your mom is about to get kicked out of her nursing home and she's gonna be on the street? You know, what does that mean? And what does morality look like? And, you know, how flexible can you make it? And I think that's what's fascinating for me. You know, Bug does things that I would never do. You know, and I think he does those things because of who he is. And I would never do them because of who I am. But I'm fascinated in looking at Bug and deciphering why he does those things. I have a character, like I said, I mentioned it before, Nathan Waymaker, who's a unlicensed private investigator who works at a funeral home. He's of mixed race heritage. He has a best friend named Skunk, who is, you know, a full disclosure, really inspired by Mouse, but different character, but inspired by Mouse. And, you know, Skunk is a killer, and Skunk is his brother. He loves him, and they love each other. And, you know, but, you know, Nathan loves his cousin Walter that owns the funeral home. The people in his life, he loves them. And that love allows a certain moral flexibility. He'll do things to protect them that on the outside may look, repugnant or abhorrent, but he lives with that aberration, so to speak, because doing the right thing sometimes necessitates doing horrible actions, I think. And so I think that's the crux. It's true in any form of literature, but I think it's especially true in crime fiction, where characters are pushed to those limits and pushed to those edges, you know. And I think that's what's fascinating and what drives me as a writer, because I'm fascinated by that idea. You know, my book that's coming out in the summer, Raised by Tears, about these two fathers, you know, one black, one white, both ex-cons, who's had these sons, these gay sons who are murdered shortly after they're married. And what these men do to not only seek vengeance for their sons, but also redeem themselves, because neither one of them were going to win Father of the Year award. And in fact, they were, you know, outwardly hostile to their son's sexuality. What they do, you know, to the outside observer is, you know, is grotesque, but they feel like they have to do it because, you know, as is the way with these types of books, wrongs have to be righted, and, you know, their debts, they got to be paid. And sometimes those debts got to be paid in blood. And so I think, again, that writing as a crime writer allows you to examine the unreliable moral compass, because everybody's moral compass is a little bit corrupted when time and needs necessitate that.
Or in capitalism, but we won't go there.
Okay. Now, last question for me. Would you agree that one of the greatest crime fiction writers ever was William Shakespeare? If we have to talk about genre. I mean, come on, Macbeth.
Well, you know, it is true. To use the term crime fiction, I mean, it's fine to use that. I mean, I would say yes to that, but I would go further to say that there are very few novels I've ever come across even the most experimental, that don't have a mystery at the heart of them.
Yes.
You know, that when you, if there's nothing to learn, why are you reading? Why are you watching? Why are you experiencing? So, well, if you know from the beginning, you know, what happened and why it happened, then you say, okay, fine, I'll go to the next book now, you know.
Mhm. It's funny. I would agree with that. You know, one of my favorite plays by Shakespeare is King Lear, and one of
Mhm.
my favorite books is A Thousand Acres. A Thousand Acres by James Smiley is based on King Lear, and that that book is held up as the epitome in some circles of literary fiction at its finest, and it is. It's an incredible book. I love that book, but at its heart, it's a crime novel.
Yeah.
You know, it's a novel of secrets and mysteries and horrific secrets and and mysteries that are suffused with abject terror. And to your point, Stephen, yeah, I think William Shakespeare was one of the greatest crime fiction writers. He's one of the great speculative fiction writers. He's one of the great horror writers. If you read Titus Andronicus, that's horror all day long. So I think and you look at. Oh yes, it's incredible. It's I would love you take Titus Andronicus and you set it around some magnolia trees in Southern Gothic. It's William Faulkner, and so it's Tennessee Williams, and so I think those great writers, you could say that about like to flip the question a little bit. Take a writer like Chester Himes, who's one of the great foundational writers of mystery fiction, but he's also writing great novels of social commentary. He's right. Donald Goins is writing, to a certain extent, it's pulp fiction, but it's also raw, almost transgressive fiction, where he's talking about, the DNA, the fabric of the street. And so I think great writers the very best of us open themselves up to a multiplicity of interpretations.
Yes. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been blessed, honored to speak with Mr. Walter Mosley, whose new book is Blood Grove, and Sean S.A. Cosby, who is soon to be crowned the King of Southern Noir, I think. At least I understand that the crown is being forged right now. I can't speak to when you'll get it.
It's made out of mason jars.
If those mason jars are full, brother, you better call.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I hope this has been as enjoyable for you as it has been for me. It's time for us to wrap things up. Thank you to Walter Mosley.
And thank you.
Say Cosby. And to all of you folks who are watching. Oh, my pleasure. And remember, consider buying these books from your local independent bookstore. That's how they live and breathe. Find your local independent bookstore, or use the link vabook.org. You can also check out other events in the all virtual 2021 Virginia Festival of the Book at vabook.org. That's capital V, small a, capital BOOK.org. And I'm your host, Steve Jones. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.